Hello, everyone. It is 1 o'clock, so I'm going to start the session. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm just going to put my screen sharing on, and then we are ready to get going. Okay, so welcome everyone to this first webinar hosted by P&H. This is the first webinar of many more to come, which we will be presenting on a monthly basis. We are starting off with HR topics, but keep an eye out for many interesting things to come. Please use the chat functionality for any questions or feedback. You will notice that there is an option for chat. We will be monitoring the chat and we will try to leave 5 minutes at the end of the session to respond. Please note the session is being recorded and we will be making it available afterwards. So today we will be discussing performance management, specifically looking at the topic software meets soft skills. My name is Helena Nell. I'm an IO psychologist and member of the P&H team, and I'll be your facilitator for today. So what is performance? How do we perceive it? Which view have you heard being promoted about performance management, and what view of performance is promoted in your organization? One company might measure only outputs and results, while another company might pay more attention to behaviors, value, long-term impact. The answer of which performance is appropriate or right will depend on the company and its strategy. So performance in that sense is dynamic. What is certain, however, is that performance can be defined incorrectly in a way that does not service the need of the organization. Let's make a practical example. And here I'd like to use the analogy of a doctor. So who would be the top performer in this example? Would it be the doctor who squeezes in as many patients as they can in one day? Would it be the doctor with the highest amount or percentage of successful surgeries? What about the doctor who hands out the most scripts and sells the most medication? Or what about the doctor who does the following, who enables patients to implement effective self-care at home, who educates them on healthy lifestyle choices, or the doctor who promotes community health? So while traditional metrics like the number of patients treated remain important in terms of results, one cannot view performance as a unilateral concept from only the view of one stakeholder. What's the reason that I say this? The definition of performance affects actual performance. So how we think, what we value, and how we reward becomes what we do. So in other words, how we think about performance affects how we actually perform and what we do as an organization. And that is why there is such an emphasis from our end on the topic of performance, not only from a system perspective and automation, but looking at what are we trying to achieve. So let's have a look at the performance landscape. We have a few people practitioners on the call today, so this might not be new information to all of us, but it's just good to keep in mind the changing landscape and what research is telling us. So in the past, we used to have a view of performance, an approach to performance that is more appraisal based in the sense of manager and employees sit together twice a year, and that a lot of the times might be the only contact sessions they have in terms of looking at performance. Now, research suggests that younger generations, and I think we're seeing it in our organizations, have a need for performance management to have a bit more of a developmental focus and to see their manager not only as a manager, but a coach. Technology, of course, plays a critical role in helping us drive the system of performance management and eliminate the administrative burden that comes with it. There is an increased focus on engagement and well-being as part of looking at performance. And I think there's an increased appreciation that performance needs to be tied back to the company's strategy. Again, not a new concept, but a growing appreciation of its importance. The next idea here is the notion of high-performing cultures. And I think the broader culture or the broader thought here is, how does your culture act essentially as a barrier or an enabler of performance? And what does your company's culture look like? Diversity and inclusion, of course, also about ensuring that these processes, like performance, is something that is experienced fairly and applied consistently with everyone in the organization, and that we are trying to make efforts in eliminating the bias that sometimes is something that we're not even aware of. Holistic rewards, in other words, here looking at rewards, not only monetary rewards, but non-monetary rewards. How do we make employees feel appreciated? Some of the typical challenges that we face when we think about performance management is that a lot of the times there is still a transactional view of performance management, meaning that it's a system that might be experienced as very rigid and that's not responding to the needs of employees within an organization, that need for more regular feedback. And practically, if your organization has a transactional view of performance management, it might look like infrequent feedback. It might be experienced as a lack of collaboration by employees. It might practically look like an HR practitioner chasing people around for completed performance reviews, or really struggling to get managers to work with you in developing KPIs. It might look like negative attitudes from stakeholders, not only employees and managers, but also more senior staff members. And I think on an employee level, it can be experienced as a lack of support from the manager, but also the organization. It might lead to low levels of engagement and even burnout. So what's the result of this view of performance as only a transaction? It's a lot of time, money, and effort spent potentially on a process that might not be adding value and making the impact that we wanted to make. So in that sense, are we seeing performance just as a tick box exercise? Or are we seeing it as something that can be transformational in its nature? So what are we to do? Today, we'd like to focus on how we can set ourselves up for success when it comes to performance management. And we'd like to share with you some potential strategies that you can apply in your organization. So here, I've just defined it in terms of the system or technology, in terms of people or soft skills, and our role as B&H and how we can support you in the process. So firstly, looking at the system, the first question is, do you have your performance foundations in place? So do you have a strategic goal clearly defined in your organization that is cascaded down to departmental goals, team goals, all the way up and into individual KPIs or behavioral indicators? So in other words, is there something in place that not only shows me as the employee what is expected of me on a daily basis, but can I also see the bigger picture of the impact that I am making in achieving this organizational goal? Do you have clearly set out and defined decisions in the form of a policy that you can apply consistently and fairly, and that is something, a principle that is defined in terms of how we do performance in our organization? So these are some examples of performance foundations. When we think about a system, it's useful to think of a system as a magnifying glass. So in this sense, if we take a performance process that at its core, it's not really meeting the needs of the organization, it's not aligned to our strategy, and it's not something that really makes sense for our organization. If we take that process, we put it on a system and automate it, the system is just going to magnify the inefficiency and frustration that is already present for that process. Whereas if we look at what we're trying to achieve with our performance structures, what are we trying to do? How does it fit into that strategy? How does it make sense in our departments and on a practical level? Is it something that is working? If we take that, put it on a system, we are magnifying the efficiency. We're eliminating the administrative side, and we really putting an effective process on a system to automate it. So I think a lot of the times when we think of a system, it's not just something that automates, it's something that you have to put a process on there that has integrity and efficacy. So if these are things that are in place in your organization, you're at a good place to implement. And we'd like to share with you this following slide. We have some of our current clients on the call who might already be doing performance on the system. The system that we use at P&H for performance management is Sage 300 People. And as a gift to you, we'd like to share the following slide for our current clients, especially to help you prepare and lay the foundation for your next performance cycle on Sage. So I'm not going to read through this word for word. We're happy to provide the slide to you afterwards as a gift from us. But high level speaking, when we look at this specific system, Sage 300 People, these are the phases to the system that we're looking at. So starting off with preparation. So how do we prepare the system? What do we need to maintain in order to have that system foundation for performance? Leading into the contracting process, it's the process where the employee and manager, not only on the system, but face-to-face, have a discussion to contract and set those performance expectations for the upcoming cycle. Your review process and how frequently you do it, of course, will be up to your company and your policy. But looking at then on a system, capturing those ratings and making sure they are safeguarded. And then also the review discussion, agreeing and collaborating on what it is the final ratings will be for that specific employee. The result phase then, of course, is using the system as a tool to help you report and analyze the data that you've collected. And lastly, then also looking at what the system offers in terms of developmental capability. So there's this function on the system called development plans, where employees can log a personal development plan. And this really fits into the idea of that regular feedback of having a development plan that a manager can collaborate on with their team members, and that can make sure that those informal, more frequent check-ins is possible and can be done with the help of this tool. So, of course, this is not now client-specific information. Your specific setup and process does play a part in this. This just gives you an overall image of the system. Looking at further strategies, we've looked at the system now. We've looked at the specific system that we use and how it can accommodate and help us drive performance. But now we also need to look at people and soft skill strategies that you can potentially implement. So some thoughts I'd like to share with you here is firstly communication, ownership, and then lastly coaching. So these are all toolkits or tools that we'd like to arm you with for your performance toolbox. So communication, what, when, and how. What is important in communicating when it comes to performance management? So you want to start communicating well in advance of the start of your performance cycle. You want to set clear expectations regarding the process, regarding timelines that must be adhered to, and also where there's a need for face-to-face sessions. In terms of consistency, you'd want to send regular reminders to keep the momentum going in a performance cycle, to keep this at the top of people's minds, so to say. Using visual tools is something that we've done that has proven to be quite effective from a change management point of view. So something like a process map to say, you are here, where are we heading to next, to keep people focused on the bigger picture of what we're trying to do. Two questions here for you that need to be included with every single communication that goes out is number one, where can your end users access training resources? And number two, who can they contact for support? The goal, as I mentioned, is to build and maintain momentum through communication. Ownership. How can we equip employees to own their performance? So this is a nice quote. When you take ownership of your performance, you take control of your future. And this relates not only to performance management, but on a personal level, I think makes sense. So a question for you here is, does your company's culture support psychological ownership? You'll notice that when I talk about ownership, I refer specifically to employees. A lot of the times, in some companies, managers are the ones that, yes, they are accountable with employees. But are they the ones that are supposed to be running around like headless chickens, chasing after people for complete performance reviews? Or is it the employee's role to own their performance, to proactively reach out to their manager, to set up feedback conversations, to ask for feedback, to be the one that is actually driving the process, to own their own development and growth? Because ultimately, that's what it's about. It's about their performance. So does your culture support that sense of ownership? The opposite here would be, let's say, a culture that is fear-based, where people are afraid of making mistakes and no one wants to own anything. In that scenario, you can imagine that psychological ownership is not probably going to be supported through that culture. So does your culture make people feel supported? And how do you deal with when people make mistakes? Um, and does that lay a foundation for them to really own their performance? So some practical suggestions here to promote psychological ownership would be, as we said, promote the employee-driven process. It might look like you, as an HR practitioner, giving broad timelines for the company's deadlines of performance. When should contracting be done? When are reviews typically done? When are informal check-ins done? That gets cascaded down by managers to their teams. But with the expectation then that within those timelines, the employees need to reach out and ask for feedback and book the meeting with their managers. That way, they are the ones essentially asking for feedback. They're the one calling for the meeting. So automatically, it leads them to owning their performance, or can lead to them owning their performance and their own growth. So do you give praise where people are taking initiative to own their growth and development? And how are self-ratings incorporated in your company's performance process? So self-ratings, yes, it's there for the employee to rate themselves to help the manager prepare for the feedback discussion. But is the manager actually taking into consideration those self-ratings? Is there collaborative discussion in that session where those self-ratings are actually used as a basis for the discussion? Or is it just seen as a tick box exercise and not really considered by the manager? Regular check-ins a lot of the times make employees feel more supported and allows them to take ownership of their performance. And ownership is something that grows when feedback focuses on not only how employees can focuses on how employees can improve and giving them specifics instead of just pointing out their mistakes. So that leads to my next idea that I'd like to share is how we can equip managers to coach their teams. A coachable team starts with a manager who listens, who teaches and empowers, guiding their team to success one conversation at a time. So a tool we'd like to share and some thoughts we'd like to share with you that you can use in your organization is, how do your managers provide feedback? And here are some tips to providing constructive feedback. So some of the foundational aspects to providing constructive feedback is that it must have a positive intention at its core, a genuine want to help someone. It must be based on fact or behavior. So if you think of the word feedback, essentially it's feeding back observations to someone that allows them to reflect and to gain self-insight. Feedback must be something that is helpful and beneficial. If it's not helpful or beneficial, it might not be something worth sharing in this context. So a tip here would be to think about building feedback culture in your organization. How can we do that? Maybe we start with bite-sized feedback, right? More regular, smaller bits and pieces of feedback, still aligned to our goals, but that build a sense of openness and receptiveness to receiving feedback, and also build a trusting relationship between manager and employee. So if I receive bits of feedback that actually are helping me, I will increase my trust in my manager because I can see that they have a positive intention in sharing this with me, and it is something that's helpful, and that increases my openness and my ownership. Um, so it's a process that all links together. I think also knowing when not to give feedback is very important, as part of the skill that managers need to develop of becoming performance coaches, is knowing when it's not appropriate to give feedback. Maybe the employee is so overwhelmed with feedback that they can't make sense and they don't have opportunity to actually implement what you are feeding back to them. Or it might be that it's something that's not beneficial or it's not related to the goal that you're trying to achieve. Preparing to give feedback where the message might be a bit more difficult is another aspect of giving constructive feedback. So in this sense, paying attention to your wording, to balance difficult messages with positive statements. So not overly positive things and only positive things, but also not only negative things. So having a good balance and the feedback sandwich here, starting with something positive, introducing a more difficult concept, remaining supportive as you're introducing that challenging subject, and not only in what you say, your wording, but how you say it, and showing empathy for the person in the process. And then, of course, ending off with something positive as well. Another aspect to giving feedback is always make sure that your observations can be linked to the goal that you're trying to achieve. So link it back to the KPI, link it back to your departmental goal. And you can see how if your strategy is linked to what you're trying to achieve on a daily basis, this becomes a useful tool in the hands of your manager as a performance coach. So the goal with coaching will always be to increase self-awareness. If we help employees increase self-awareness, it might lead them to understand themselves better. It might lead them to managing themselves better as a professional. And ultimately, it results in an increase in their personal performance, resulting in an increase of organizational performance. So coaching in this sense, I think on a personal level is not only about short-term gain, while results are of course very important, but we need to look at also the long-term aspect, because coaching is a process, one conversation at a time. Now, the last potential strategy would be to look at support. So how can we as a P&H team support you in this process? So I think there is, when we speak about culture and performance management, can be a bit of a loaded topic in some organizations. Maybe someone comes from an organization where performance was not done well in the past, or maybe in terms of feedback, it wasn't dealt with responsibly. So in terms of objectivity, there is to come as an external consultant, and having the objectivity is very beneficial in looking at these things. We can also help you on the technology front, of course, looking at a system demonstration for new clients or potential clients, And also for current clients, looking at, are you using the systems you already have access to optimally? On the soft skills approach, we have some service offerings that we are introducing, looking at, is your performance process tied back to strategy? Do you have a strategy in place? Can you link clearly from strategy all the way up to individual KPIs and behavioral indicators? Looking at then, as part of that process, looking at job profiling. Do you have role profiles in place that very clearly show how each role fits into that bigger picture? Do you have performance agreements in place? So from your job profile, looking at what are we going to measure on? How will it be measured? How are we defining performance and what performance means on the specific KPI? Upskilling, of course, looking at soft skills. Can your managers coach employees? Can they have these feedback conversations? Do they know how to give feedback and structure performance sessions with employees? Something else is looking at engagement. Like we said earlier, well-being initiatives is something that is growing in its importance, and that can give you that feedback of the areas in which your organization is doing well, or maybe some areas of improvement. And then also looking at things like performance policies. So do you have those decisions made and in place when it comes to performance? Have you made those decisions beforehand that make sense, and that is practically workable and that can be applied fairly and consistently in your company? So from us at P&H, thank you so much for spending time with us. I'm quickly going to have a look at the chat, and then to see if there's any questions that need answering. So let me quickly just have a look there. I'll stop my sharing now. Okay, so it looks like we don't have any specific questions at this time. I think, yeah, from all of us at P&H, thank you so much for spending your lunchtime with us. We so enjoy having you with us, and we look forward to your feedback. Please contact us. Let us know if there's anything that you might want us to present on next, something that would be helpful and beneficial for you in your organization. And yes, if you have enjoyed this webinar with us, please feel free to share it. We are looking forward to many more of these sessions in the future. And yeah, thank you so much. We will make the recording available to you afterwards. Thank you. Thank you for all the claps and thank yous. I see Tasha raised a hand. Tasha, can you unmute yourself? Let me quickly see if I can unmute you. Thanks for the heart, Etienne.
Elena, I think Tasha's left. It looks like she's can't see her Anya anymore.
Yes. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.